Shabbat Shalom, everybody. A few weeks back, Rabbi Woznica shared some of his reflections on some of the anti-Semitic statements that we've been hearing and the uptick in anti-Semitism that we've been confronting, and he promised that he would return with a continuation of some of those themes, and we thought it'd be nice to do it a little bit as a dialogue so we could have a little bit of back and forth, although I'm sure that I can say that we agree that anti-Semitism should be combated and suppressed as much as we possibly can. But the origins of anti-Semitism and the hows of combating and confronting, we don't have perfect answers that are agreed upon by everyone. And so we're going to have a bit of a conversation. If you're joining from home, if you have any comments that you want to share, feel free to chime in. And those of you who are here in the sanctuary, maybe after services, if we have things you want to share, we can do so. It's not always the easiest conversation to have or the most pleasant, but it obviously is quite timely. And so I wanted to begin just with a sense from you, David, about the origins of anti-Semitism. And it's so difficult to even approach that question. There have been books and books and books written about it. I brought one of my favorites by one of my college professors, John Gager, called The Origins of Anti-Semitism. Barry Weiss, Deborah Lipstadt, in the last 3 or 4 years, both published books that dealt with this. What's your perspective? This is something you've had dialogues with Ambassador Lipstadt. This is something that you've reflected on deeply. Where do you think this comes from?
Well, I think even the way that you raised the question is important. Origins of anti-Semitism. I was just thinking about it as you were speaking. It would be chutzpahdik for me to say there is a specific origin. But I suspect that if everybody in this room or watching were to have an imaginary pen and paper, and I were to say to any of us, write down what you think one of the origins of anti-Semitism is, probably almost everybody at some point would write the word scapegoat. That's certainly something that I heard, and I think that there's some truth to it. When things go bad, wherever Jews are, we tend to be the first pointed to. Oh, the economy is bad, Jews, et cetera, et cetera. So I do subscribe to it to some point, but then I realize it doesn't fully answer the question, because it doesn't say why are the Jews always the scapegoat? Why not the Catholics? Why not the fill in the blank? So it occurred to me and others that there has to be a deeper reason for it. Often people will use the economy as a means to express their anti-Semitism. For example, there's no question that in the 30s, Hitler, Yamach Shemo, his name should be erased, used the Depression as a means to power. But his means to power was not using the Jews as a means to power. He wanted power to destroy the Jews. So he wrote in Mein Kampf, and I don't know if it was 24 or 27, he wrote, "The Jews are the conscience of the world. We must destroy the conscience. We must destroy the Jews." He wanted to destroy the Jews. And Lucy Davidovich, it was the one, I think, who in the war against the Jews made the point that he actually took troops off lines to fight the enemy, the military enemy, so that they could destroy more Jews. So what is it about us? In other words, from the Roman Empire to the Soviets and everything in between, the church, the Muslim world at times, parts of the Muslim world, et cetera, et cetera. What is it about this 1/4 of 1% of the world population that is such a threat? We're not powerful. And I came to a realization. It's not Jews that they want to destroy. It's Judaism that they want to destroy. It's what we stand for. It's our values. We come into the world and we say to the world, there are certain ideals that God expects from us. There's a Torah that's a roadmap of how we should ask. All of those things were revolutionary in this day. And you actually alluded to it a little bit earlier when we were standing for the Lecha Dodi, and you talked about Am Segula. That's our purpose. So our purpose to be a chosen people, to be a people who strive, not always achieve, but strive to live up to our higher ideal. We are a thorn in the side of the rest of the world. And here he was right. We are the conscience of the world. People don't like being told that they're wrong, and we're hated for that. One last comment, because I'd love to hear your response to that. And that is, it means we're not just hated because we're another ethnic minority. It's not just another form of hate. We're hated for what we stand for, our values, and that gives meaning to those who hate us. I wish we were not hated, but I'm kind of proud for the reasons for which I believe this origin of Jew hatred camp comes from.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's obviously, as you started your comments, origins. There are many, sadly, whether it's scapegoating. Certainly in the John Gager book that I referenced earlier, it focuses on attitudes toward Judaism in pagan and Christian antiquity. So he really takes it back more than 2,000 years, and
Right.
and he shows even before Christianity comes to be, before the church fathers in 3rd and 4th century, as some of these anti-Semitic tropes begin to find their way more deeply into the way the Gospels are understood and kind of acted out, as it were, around Easter time, which historically was a time of
Right.
fear for
Terrible.
Jews, because it was often there was a pogrom or some sort of violence that would follow that. But he notes how that actually predates Christianity. But then some of those themes that exist there continue to echo and reverberate. And one of the things I end up with, I really find myself, though I've read all of those things and I've had a chance to speak to some of those incredible scholars of anti-Semitism, I still just end up scratching my head.
Right.
Just saying,
What is it
don't-
about us, right?
I don't get it. Because again, there are others who you could point to and say, well, they're always speaking out about the way we're supposed to behave, or they could be the conscience
That's right.
of humanity. Or they,
No, you're right.
and again, when you think about our size relative to our influence, it's something I think the world should be so grateful to us for, and we should be so proud of. We're just this, as you said, one in America, about 2% of the population, and then
Right.
worldwide, 1/4%. As we say in Yiddish, like gornisht. It's like it's nothing. And yet, if you look at all the things that should fill us with pride when we think about Jewish Nobel Prize winners, and we think about the ways that we have contributed beyond our numbers in terms of art and music. Actually, Jon Stewart, some of what he said about Dave Chappelle, I think some of us found a little jarring, but he did make one line that was quite funny, and that is his job is to be funny. He said, if you don't like the Jews, go write your own Broadway musicals. We've certainly
Right.
punched above our weight in that. But let's focus, and we could talk all night
Oh,
about
you said
that. Yeah.
one thing that just occurred to me, and that is, that they should respect this. They do. Judaism is respected. I think we shouldn't lose. We focus on when something really bad happens or something terrible is said. There's tens of millions of Americans, maybe hundreds of millions, who do respect Judaism, who do think that we have made tremendous,
Absolutely.
contributions. So what's that
Absolutely.
book, the Gift of the Jews, Tom Cahill's book, where he talks about what we've given to the world? That was a big selling book. So I think you actually make a very good point
Right.
there as well.
And some of the anti-Semitic tropes that we find troubling do come out of a place of admiration. So when someone
That's right.
says,
That's right.
forgive me, but when someone says, get yourself a Jew lawyer, what they mean is, if you want a competent attorney who will really be able to make
Yeah,
your case,
no, it's a good
you should
point.
find someone who's Jewish. So there's something anti-Semitic, of course, about that, but there's also praise. Or the idea that we are influential beyond our numbers, and that we are, in the most virulent, in some ways, trope in the elders of the protocols of Zion and the protocols of the elders of Zion.
Right.
It's about how this small group of Jews is controlling the world. Well, the positive thing about that too, it's not true, by the way, if you're joining in, that's not the case. If it were, one of the things we probably would take care of is anti-Semitism. I think
That's true.
I think we
That's
would have
great.
fixed
If
that.
we're not that powerful.
Yeah, exactly. If we were actually controlling everything, I think we'd take care of that first. And then we make sure that like BDS on college
Yeah.
campuses and other things, would be erased. But the kernel of admiration that's in that is like, look at
Yeah.
these Jews. They're so clever, and they have influence and power, which, by the way, I was told once by the Israeli ambassador to Korea, told me that one of the things that he discovered in his time there is that a lot of these anti-Semitic tropes, he experienced them anecdotally, people would tell him those things. Yeah, Jews control everything. But it always came from a place of great admiration.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why we love the Jews, because you're so clever. You're so good with money. You know how to control and spin things. And we love that about you. And he realized that all of the same anti-Semitic tropes were there, but instead of it becoming, and therefore you should be exterminated, it was, and therefore we should try to follow in your footsteps.
So let me ask you then
Yeah.
a question to pose to you. What do you think we should do about this? What should be the reaction of us as a people to anti-Semitism?
Well, thank you. So really, the first question is about the why of anti-Semitism, and this question that you ask is really the how. And first of all, I want to remind everybody, if you're viewing from home or here with us, that we have put together at our Stephen Wise Temple website a page of all the different responses. It's one of these things that you can't believe you would have to do, but we actually have a landing page, wisela.org/anti-Semitism, and there are all of, not actually everything.
It's not a pro or con,
but
it's all...
we're not in favor, but it's David's interview with Deborah Lipstadt from a few years back, who's now our ambassador and special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. There's sermons that we've given. There's articles that we've written in the Jewish Journal in the forward. So you can find a lot of resources there. But also is the sermon that I gave in 2020 on Yom Kippur that I called Transcendence Now. And the idea was that we have to transcend anti-Semitism. First, we have to respond to it. And the way we respond to it is we have to protect ourselves. And so if you come up onto our campus here on this hilltop, we have robust security.
That's right.
And we're grateful to our generous community and also grants that we've received from the state of California and the United States government to help protect ourselves. We have to do that. But we also have to combat anti-Semitism. We have to, through education, through conversations, being upstanders, and also through allyship. As you said, we're just a tiny fraction of humanity. If the entire world hated us, if everyone hated us, and decided they had to rid the world of the Jews, they could.
That's right.
Despite the fact that we have a strong state of Israel, if the whole world decided to rid itself of the Jews, that would be the end of us. So we need allies, and that means making friends and also standing up for others. When we stand up against racism, when we stand up against bias, against, you name it, because we know it's wrong, hopefully our friends will be there for us, and many of them have been. Over the last couple of months.
Absolutely.
I'm sure many of you have had non-Jewish friends reach out and say, and then the final thing, so we respond, we combat, but the final thing is how do we transcend it? And Deborah Lipstadt has a great little turn of a phrase. She says, instead of just spending all the time thinking about the oys of Judaism, think about the joys of Judaism. And that means celebrate your Judaism proudly. What you should be proud of, if you're part of Stephen Wise Temple, is to know that we have a vibrant early childhood education program at our Aaron Milken Center. We have a world-class elementary school. We have a fantastic Center for Youth Engagement, our Center for Jewish Learning. We have our Melton program. We celebrate our Judaism with great energy and joy and vigor, and that is how we transcend anti-Semitism. How about for you? What are some of the ways that you would respond to the world's oldest hatred?
Well, first I would echo what you said. I think every time we stand, you come to synagogue, every time you open a Torah text, every time a Jew stands for the Shema or proclaims his or her faith in God, that's the biggest way when celebrating our tradition. And the second thing is, if they're making war, if one of the reasons we're hated is the war against our values, then the more people we bring to our values, the greater likelihood anti-Semitism will abate. It's not a coincidence that the countries that have the strongest Judeo-Christian origins are the ones where we have felt the most comfortable and been the best to us. So the more we can influence the world to appreciate and accept the values of Judaism, and hopefully that they will live it, not to become Jews, but to the ideals that there is a God.
They could become Jews, though.
That's a good thing.
You're
No,
welcome
it's a
to.
good
Right,
thing.
right.
But I think that too would go a long way to diminishing it. And certainly the allies that we have are generally people who hold these things sacred in their hearts.
But I was wasn't trying to joke around when I talked about conversion to Judaism, because certainly when someone chooses Judaism, not only does that give us a deeper sense of pride and a sense like, wow, because one of the insidious things that happens with anti-Semitism is it often is internalized as a type of self-hatred and
That's
self-loathing.
absolutely right.
Jews look at themselves and say, that I guess there's something wrong with us, and that's why people don't like us. But when someone chooses to become part of our community and our people, despite the fact that there's so much anti-Semitism in the world, it can give us a great boost. But also their families often come to appreciate Judaism in deeper ways, and then they realize, oh, I didn't myself know so much about Judaism. So there's all of these different ways that we can respond. Obviously, there's a lot of great work to do, challenging work to do, but also joyous work to do, because when we embrace our Judaism with pride, and when we stand up tall and say, you know what, I don't understand why there are some in this world who don't care for us, but I'm sure proud to be Jewish, and I want to be publicly Jewish, and I want to live my life and live my values in a way that shows how much pride I have in that. I want to just end with one verse from Zechariah. The prophet Zechariah, it's found in the middle of our Bible. There are 12 prophets known as the minor prophets, and he's the 11th of the 12. And he lived in the 6th century before the Common Era, so a long time ago. And he lived during the time after the destruction of the first temple, and under the Persian occupation of that, or dominion of that region, and prior really to the rebuilding of the second temple. So it was a very fearful time for Jews. Yeah. The Jews wondered, will we be able to continue? The temple was no more. The only way we knew how to observe our Judaism had been destroyed. And he's the one, this time of the year especially, we think of him because he's the one who said, not by might, not by power, but by spirit. But by spirit shall we be victorious. So he said it's not about a military victory. It's about that pride. It's about living our Jewish values. But then he also coined this incredible phrase, which I love, in chapter 9. He calls us asirei hatikva. He calls us prisoners of hope. So even though there are reasons to be afraid sometimes, even though there are things that cause us great concern, we never give up hope, because we know we've been through tough times. There are sometimes tough times we find ourselves in, and we know we can get through those. So I pray that will be the case for all of us.